Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Vanishing Hour. So, a little update before we begin. If you've listened to our latest episode about the drownings in La Crosse and you want more, part 2 will be sometime in the future. I haven't forgotten about it. Just wanting to switch gears up here and cover other stories for a little bit. That particular episode is like a multi-parter and will be at least one more episode, if not more. When, though, I'll keep you updated if you're interested, but it's coming. But today, we are going to be talking about an unrelated case, yet, eerily enough, it still involves a drowning. This is a new case to me that I recently saw featured on a show on the Investigation Discovery Network, ID Network, something like that, called Still a Mystery, and it stuck out to me almost immediately. It made me a little sad, but it also really made me wonder what the fuck happened here. I think one of the most terrifying aspects of murder are the ones that take place out in the middle of broad daylight and literally in a blink of an eye, and then poof, the perpetrator is just gone. It leaves me with like this ultimate horrified whiplash moment, and like I said, it's terrifying. So today we are covering one of these cases, at least for me. This is the vanishing and subsequent unsolved murder of Alicia Hummel. So let's dive in here. Now, a little backstory on Alicia. She was born June 27th, 1985. She and her sister Erica were raised by their loving grandparents, Jan and Dwayne Folkers. I hope I'm saying that right. In Sioux City, Iowa, which is pretty much on the border where Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota all meet. I will be completely honest, I had no idea these three states were even that close to each other. Like, my geography has taken a hit to the ego here. But yeah, I had no idea they were like all that close to each other. Honestly, I don't even think I thought they were next to each other. Doesn't matter. Anyway. So yeah, she grew up in Sioux City, Iowa with her grandparents and her sister Erica. From the way her family and friends described her, Alicia was a very selfless human being. She spent a good portion of her time in education, and by that I mean like in college. This girl just had it going on. She changed majors from nursing to child development with an eventual interest in speech pathology, which is a field very near and dear to my heart because I have 2 kids that are currently diagnosed with either speech delays or behavioral development issues. So we are very well versed in speech pathologists and the work that they contribute to children. So I read that and that really sung to my heart. But at the time of her death, Alicia was working as a preschool teacher at the Siouxland Family Center in Dakota City, Iowa. Aside from her education, though, Alicia also joined the military and was hoping to pursue a career through the military that would also help pay for her school and whatnot. However, unfortunately, she was medically discharged not long into her military training due to a knee injury. She left the military, but she didn't let that kind of keep her down, though. She did come back home and she continued on with her education, where she ultimately received 2 degrees with the plan to pursue her master's degree. In 2003, Alicia met her future husband, Tony Hummel, and the 2 began to date. They were introduced through a mutual friend, I believe, and they kind of just like hit it off. And keep in mind, back in 2003, Alicia was still in high school. They continued to date, though, throughout the remainder of her high school years and well into her college years. In 2011, Tony actually proposed to Alicia in like a very cute way. I saw a photo where like he like painted "Will you marry me" into the snow. Somebody got a picture of it. It was really cute. But yeah, they got married in 2011. And shortly after that, the 2 decided to move to Newcastle, Nebraska. Again, not far from where Alicia was growing up and living. It was only about like 30 minutes northwest of her hometown in Sioux City. By 2014, though, it seemed like things were starting to tank for her and Tony. Alicia really wanted to start considering having a family, while Tony wasn't really feeling the idea. She started feeling that Tony was distancing himself from her, and she was just getting like the vibes, if you know what I'm talking about. She did her best though to try to keep things together, and she continued to put forth effort to make the relationship work. However, it doesn't sound like Tony was keeping up his end. They had been together for so long by this point that all Alicia really knew was her life with Tony. And I get that, it's hard to really know who you are outside of your partner when you've been together since you were kids, pretty much. It's a rough place to be in. But at some point, Alicia had to face the reality that the marriage just wasn't working. She found out Tony was cheating on her with another woman, and it kind of just left her in a moral dilemma. She was raised in a religious environment, and she had to try to find a way to make peace with the decision that this wasn't going to work and they were headed towards a divorce, which in her own way she did. She decided to move back in with her grandparents in Sioux City. She changed her social media status to single, and she removed that wedding band from her finger and began to take steps towards moving on. She joined a roller derby team, which I wish I had the balls to do. It looks awesome. And she began to discover her own self-worth and work on accepting the fact that their marriage didn't fail because she wasn't good enough. She was perfect the way she was, and she was ready to start loving herself more and becoming more independent. Which, you hear that and you're just like, oh, God, it just makes you sad. That's such a dark place to be in personally. It's a tough lesson that I think we all encounter at some point in our lives, sometimes more than once. Most of us are fortunate to find our way through, and to know that she was on that path to finding her way through the bullshit, and then all of this happens, and she just wasn't given the opportunity to get to a good place is just shitty. That's what always baffles me about murder. You always hear that cheesy saying, tomorrow's never promised. Yeah, but no shit, it really isn't. I think the beauty of life is that although we have control of what we choose to do with ours, we don't have control over when it begins or when it ends. And I'm personally okay with that. I feel like that's how it should be for everyone. But the fact that there are people out there that decide to take matters into their own hands and make that decision for others is just disgustingly wild and absurd, and it goes against the workings of life in my brain. I struggle with wrapping my head around that. I am off on such a fucking tangent right now that is relevant yet not, so let me reel it back in here real quick and we will continue. So Alicia and Tony were heading towards the divorce route. It wasn't easy for her. She didn't like it. Her heart was breaking. She was struggling with self-worth. But she didn't let that consume her. She pushed through and became a more resilient person because of it. So on Monday, June 1st, 2015, Alicia had made the decision to spend the day doing something that she enjoyed, fishing. Let me get a sip of coffee here real quick. The night before, on May 31st, Alicia posted to Facebook, like she did many times before, that she wanted to go fishing. She wanted to go fishing. So when she woke up the next morning, she decided essentially, fuck it, I'm gonna go fishing. Fishing was something that Alicia was very familiar with and did both with family and friends as well as alone on occasion. The prior weekend, she was not able to attend like a fishing trip / celebration with family and friends that had been planned. So she wanted to make it up to herself and plan like a trip of her own. That morning, she got on the horn and called several friends and asked if they wanted to join her. Now, being that it was a Monday, it was probably a long shot. Most of them said, hey, we can't make it now. We might be able to meet up with you later, but it looks like it's a no-go for us. She figured, that's fine. It's cool. I'm still going to go, though. She had been looking forward to it all winter and spring, and now it was perfect weather time to be fishing. And like I said, she was a teacher, and it was officially summertime. This was the first day of her vacation. She was going to spend it doing something she wanted it to do. I said that weird. Anyway, so her grandma, Jan, asked her to please reconsider, being that she was going out alone. And while she knew Alicia was independent and smart and responsible, she just didn't like the idea of her being out alone, which, I mean, I'm not even a grandma, and I'm the same exact way. I just go with somebody. You don't I believe you can do it alone, but you don't have to. That's how I am. It sounds like her grandma was just like, nah, just go with somebody, please. Obviously, that didn't happen. Alicia told her grandma, I'm fine. Don't worry. I got my phone. I'll keep in contact with you. You know where I'm going to be at. This is how long I'm going to be gone. It won't be a problem. So with that, her grandma was like, well, I can't stop you. So Alicia packed up her rod. She headed out, and she asked her grandpa before leaving that if she had brought some fish home later, would he help her clean them out? Which, of course, he would say yes, because every grandpa would say yes, and grandpas are just sweet little old men that we love. So with that, she grabs her stuff, she hugs her grandparents bye, she throws her fishing pole in the car, and she takes off. Now, the interesting thing about Alicia's case from this point on is that social media is pretty much the only thing that pulls her timeline together for investigators. Being that she was such an active user of several platforms, this gave investigators a clear outline of the events that happened leading up to her murder that morning. So, Alicia gets in the car and is about to take off. For doing so, she posts to Snapchat, which was a picture of her fishing rod, sitting in her front seat, sticking out of the sunroof, with the caption reading, quote, "When your pole doesn't fit in your car." Basically, her fishing pole was so long that the only way she was able to travel with it was to have it sticking out of the top of her car with the sunroof open. Now, that makes complete sense to me. Apparently, you can collapse your fishing rod and it'll fit fine, but I wouldn't want to do that. It's already set up and shit. I wouldn't collapse mine. And it sounds like Alicia was like, nah, fuck it. I got a sunroof. This works. So after posting that photo to Snapchat, she headed out. Some sources stated that Alicia had trouble locating her tackle box that morning as well. So she decided to head to a Walmart to purchase new supplies. Either way, she was headed to Walmart because she needed to purchase a local fishing license for the day, and I guess you can purchase those at a Walmart. I've never bought one in my life. I take that back. I've bought one before, but it was lake fishing, a state park lake fishing. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so she heads to the local Walmart and she purchases the fishing license. She arrives at the Walmart in Vermilion, which is located roughly 30 to 40 minutes northwest of Sioux City, which wasn't far from Newcastle, where she had been living prior. She is verified on surveillance, arriving sometime around 1 p.m. At 1:19 p.m., Alicia sends a text to a friend mentioning the sweet old man who sold her a fishing license and that he had wished her good luck in her catches for the day. After leaving Walmart, Alicia then heads 12 miles west to the remote fishing spot, Myron's Grove. Now, I say remote because it looks remote to me, but this was a place that was known by locals, and even though it's out in the middle of nowhere, it was a known spot to go fishing and boating, so I just want to throw that out there as I give the description of it. So, this particular area is in South Dakota, and I went on Google Maps because I wanted to see it for myself. The images haven't been updated since September of 2009, so they're a little old. But I figured, hey, 2009 was prior to 2015, so at least I get to see what it looks like before. But anyway, regardless, it's this huge, giant open field area, miles of just open fields. It looks like it might be farmland, or it was around this time. There's a big stretch of highway out in the middle of these dryish looking fields. There are a few scattered residential areas as you approach the fork in the road. This fork takes you to Myron's Grove. So the fork, you can either continue straight at this point, but it turns more into a gravel, unpaved, smaller road. Or it veers right and continues on its merry way, being a paved little highway and whatnot. Now, for Alicia, she would have continued straight for about 100 feet onto the gravel road before she would have hung a left and went about 1.5 miles tops down a dirtish, gravelly road until that dead ended at the Missouri River, which was Myron's Grove. Now, Myron's Grove's parking lot was like a dirt cul-de-sac that was encircled by tall, shrubbish looking trees. And again, it's literally out in the middle of nowhere. There's no houses, there's really no businesses, there's no restaurants. There's like one little building I can see, but I think that's just like, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what it is. Maybe they sell bait and tackle or some shit. I don't know. It's a tiny little building. I can only see it from the air. But aside from that, it's deserted. There's a singular boat landing that leads into the water with a skinny semi-permanent dock located right on top of the boat landing. Now, by semi-permanent, I just mean the thing looks like it isn't cemented to the ground or super sturdy. It's like 2 persons width wide. There's no handrails, there's no guardrails, or those like little bait chopping boards that are gunky as fuck that I associate with fishing areas. It's just, it looks like just a random place nobody would know about. It's very isolated looking. Does have a wooden sign, like board posted as you head down the incline towards the dock. But again, no houses, no buildings, no restaurants. There might be a tiny little shack for a bait shop, but it's shrouded in shrubbery. However, again, this is definitely a locals area. You have literally no way of stumbling upon this by chance if you are not already familiar with the area. Now, without the context of what happens here, I could definitely see this being a place where you would go to either be alone and just marinate in your thoughts, not be bothered, throw your fishing rod into the water. I was going to say ocean, into the river. And that was kind of what this place was for Alicia. This was her favorite spot to go fishing in. And, despite it being out in the middle of seemingly nowhere, again, it was mentioned several times that at least for summertime, this place was popping. This was the place for most locals to go boating and fishing. It would be weird for it to be deserted this time of year. Any other time of year, spring, fall, winter, sure. But this was the beginning of summer. There should have been a decent amount of people in the area. So just keep that in mind as we go forward. So at about 1:30 p.m., Alicia arrives safely at Myron's Grove. She takes a photo and sends a snap of the signage with the dock in the background and a pretty view of the river with the caption, "Finally, I've been waiting since fall." From where she is standing to take this photo, it puts her pretty close to the water, and aside from the dock and the river and the sign, you can't see any of her other surroundings. You can't even see like her leg or her foot or something. It's very narrow. You don't see anybody with her, and at this point the parking lot would be directly behind her, so you can't see if there's cars or other people. It looks empty. Now at 1:45 p.m., Alicia sent her last text message to a friend regarding something she saw at the fishing spot. She sent, quote, "Apparently it's a nice day to get it on in the car midday too, LMAO," which, for those of you who don't know, means laughing my ass off. The text obviously insinuated that at some point between her last text and this one, Alicia witnessed what she believed to be 2 people fucking in a car in the parking lot. Now, this is the last communication anyone receives from Alicia. Her social media posts go dark after this as well. Now, at 3:30 p.m., no more than an hour and 45 minutes after her last text, an employee for the Game, Fish, and Parks discovers Alicia in the water next to Myron's Grove fishing dock. That is an incredibly small window of time. Police are obviously called at this point. Meanwhile, Alicia's family and friends note that she hasn't been active on social media and she isn't responding to any of their texts or calls. They assumed she would have been gone. She wouldn't have been gone for long, maybe a couple hours tops, and so they start to become concerned. By about 5:20 p.m. that evening, they decided to contact the police and report her missing. Her not being home and not responding to them was unheard of. Alicia always had her phone on her, it was charged, and she was responding to everyone constantly. Sadly, by 10:30 p.m. that night, Jan and Dwayne received a call from the detective that would be working her case from that point on, stating that Alicia was found dead. In an interview with local media, Jan recalled the conversation she had with him, where he stated, "We will find the son of a bitch." Now, when police recovered her body from the water, they sent it out to the medical examiner's office for autopsy, obviously. So the examiner's findings immediately ruled it a homicide. And while what ultimately killed her was drowning, they found that blunt force trauma to the head and incision wounds to the neck played a part in her death as well. Obviously, this meant that someone else was there that day and attacked her. And whoever it was, they felt the need to not only strike her in the head with something, but to slice her neck and then toss her in the water. Clay County Sheriff Howe stated in an interview with Kiloland, I hope I said that right, which sounds like it's like a local media outlet for that area. But they featured Alicia's case in June of this year. And they interviewed Sheriff Howe. And he could confirm the blunt force trauma and the, quote, cutting wounds on her neck. He could not say what weapon was used on the neck injuries, but he stated that they knew what weapon was used to cause the blunt force trauma. He did not, however, disclose what that weapon was, or how they came to the conclusion of what it was. The results of Alicia's autopsy have never been publicly released to anyone, including her family, with reasons being that her autopsy may contain information only the killer would know. That leads me to conclude that there was a lot more that they found than just the blunt force trauma and the neck wounds. They had to have found more. Now, a toxicology report was done and it was released, and it showed no signs of drug or alcohol in her system at the time of her death, which rules out any remote thought someone could have had that this was somehow self-inflicted or accidental due to an influence of drugs or alcohol. Back at Myron's Grove, police scoured the area looking for clues. The only physical evidence that they have released to the public regarding Alicia's case are, one, a pair of men's black, quote, restaurant-style shoes. If any of you have ever worked in food service before, you know what I'm talking about. That catalog they pass around and you pick out a pair of hideous black rubber-soled shoes with the specific grip design on the bottom. Some version of those were found out near the crime scene. Now, obviously, this being a dirt road fishing spot in a remote area only really known to the locals with little civilization to justify these shoes being there, police feel they are relevant to the case. However, they have not stated if they have identified the owner of the shoes or if there was any DNA evidence found on them or anywhere really pertaining to the case. The other piece of potential physical evidence they collected that day was a witness statement of a black or dark-colored vehicle with tinted windows and a loud exhaust system in the area around the time of the murder. No license plate, model, or further description of the driver were ever released, so it's not known if they have that information. The Clay County Sheriff working the case, Andy Howe, has again remained pretty tight-lipped regarding the case throughout the interviews he has done and with the family. Obviously, this can be frustrating for those who want answers or want to help, but it is for good reasons. This is how many cases are solved. You withhold info to protect the case and give it a better shot at being solved. But there is a line. This case happened back in 2015. We are now in 2021. And I feel it has hit a serious lull here and is at risk of going cold. Again, this is just my unprofessional opinion. But I would think that it's time to release, a new piece of information to refresh the case in everyone's mind, to jog memories, to stir up emotion, to rattle cages, something. Now, Alicia's family stated that when her body was released to them and they began the preparations to lay her to rest, They noted several things pertaining to her hands. First, that her fingertips were all black. Now, this could have been for identification purposes. They take prints of victims as a step of identification. Her family knew she hadn't been dead long enough for it to be any sort of like decomposition, so they felt it was possibly from DNA fingernail scrapings, which is a solid observation. That being paired with the fact that they noticed that one of her fingers was broken. This indicated to them that she must have put up a hell of a fight when she was attacked. They speculate that her finger was broken in the process of her attacker ripping her phone from her hand. Now, Alicia was not going to part easily with her phone. Her family referred to her phone as her, quote, Bible. It had her whole world in there, and given the fact that her phone was never located, this is very well possible. Given that her belongings were missing, police had to consider that maybe this was a mugging gone wrong. They also followed a normal protocol and started looking into Alicia's life and seeing if the answer to who murdered her was lying in plain sight. So while working these two theories, police posted up surveillance cameras at Myron's Grove, which, low-key, what were they not there to begin with? But whatever. And that ended up catching upwards of 2,000 images, and they hoped that there would be some sort of suspicious activity that would be caught, whether it was, a suspected perpetrator returning to the scene of the crime, or somebody dumping evidence, or maybe even a familiar face from Alicia's inner circle skulking around. However, they state nothing, quote, unusual was ever caught on camera. At the same time, police had discovered the rocky soon-to-be divorce between her and Tony and decided to place a heavy microscope on him to see what they could find. Now, all police would say is that they checked into Tony's alibi, which was, he said he was in Pierre, which is, I think, like 3 hours away from Myron's Grove, with family. Police say that they checked it out and they ruled him out. There has been no publicly named suspects in this case. However, many do find it eerie that Alicia's death came like a mere 2 days before she was supposed to sign the divorce proceeding papers. Some stated that Tony's family was fearful that Alicia would try to take property that was rightfully Tony's in the divorce. To me, I didn't get the vibe that that was anything even remotely of interest to her. Obviously, I didn't know her personally, but if it was a valid concern of theirs, it would make for a strong motive in wanting her dead. It wouldn't be hard to find her either, given that she updated her social media with all her movements throughout that day. Sheriff House stated in an interview that while Tony Hummel had been cleared of suspicion, they have other unnamed persons that have not been cleared. Again, no names. But what is interesting is that while her family feels that the manner in which Alicia was attacked and murdered seems like overkill and screams crime of passion and points at someone she knew possibly, police were leaning more in the opposite direction completely. They state that they have collected nothing that has indicated that this was anything more than a stranger and a crime of opportunity. I found this to be very interesting. Now, as mentioned before, Alicia's phone was never found. Her fishing rod, too, was never located either. And for the next year after her death, this was the case for her purse as well. Police checked out the soon-to-be ex and cleared him, and they felt since her purse was gone that, hey, maybe this was once again a mugging gone wrong. That was until Alicia's purse turned up on a sandbar nearby a year later. Her purse still contained her wallet and money and credit cards, so that quickly shat all over the mugging gone wrong theory. So that really only leaves us with the random stranger / crime of opportunity, or the crime of passion / someone close to her. So let's discuss both. Evidence that would support a random crime of opportunity would be the seemingly lack of motive. If her husband was cleared of any involvement and they had nobody else who knew her that would want her dead, logically, that's where random psycho steps in. Weapons the police know to be used, if they are weapons of opportunity, such as a cement block or a big rock to inflict blunt force trauma, that would also make sense. Withholding the autopsy results indicates that there was possibly more there. For example, maybe sexual assault was involved. Given the location, absolutely sexual assault would point in the direction of a random attacker. And remember, Alicia made the comment about seeing people banging in the car near Myron's Grove, of which have never come forward to identify themselves as being there. Remember I mentioned earlier that Myron's Grove is a bitchin' spot for fish and boat this time of year, and that it would be hella weird for there not to be people out there? Literally 0 people have come forward to state they were there that day. Now, that wouldn't be weird if Alicia hadn't have made the statement herself minutes before her death that there were people there that she saw. It's very suspicious and eerie. If those sex bunnies are innocent, it's still suspicious as fuck that they never came forward and said, hey, that was us, we saw this, or hey, we saw nothing. Now, tips came in about that dark-colored car with tinted windows and loud exhaust, but that car has never been able to be identified, nor its driver. I find it hard to believe that because it sounds like a car that would just be so out of place for the area. Obviously, I am basing this off of pictures that I've seen, so I know that doesn't mean much, but I mean, a loud exhaust? I feel like people wouldn't be out driving country roads when they've invested like that type of money into their car. It's just a thought I had. But it also makes me wonder, where did this tip come from? Who did it come from? Now, I didn't read this anywhere, and this is just pure speculation, but I wondered if anyone else felt this when they heard this case. So I'm researching, watching, and reading all the info I have on this case, and I get that familiar stab of something that just sticks out. It doesn't quite fit in with the rest. It wants to. It should. It's almost normal, but it's not. Not to me, at least. And you know what it was? The fish and game employee. Now think about it. They belong there. To the point where they're pretty much a part of the scenery for a lot of us, I think. Anyone who's been to national parks or state parks or just wilderness areas in general know what I'm talking about. You notice the water, the beautiful scenery, the animal life, the silence in some instances. You take note of the sunsets or the sound of bugs and critters and shit. You're swatting mosquitoes away. You pay literally no mind to the guys picking up trash nearby in the camo shorts and hiking boots with the employee tag on his shirt. He's meant to be there. Nobody cares. They're hard to remember when they aren't out of place. Now, granted, I'm paranoid as fuck and would notice them first, but normal people wouldn't, and that's my point. Alicia noticed the sex bunnies in the car because why? They're out of place. She wouldn't take a second glance at a fish and game employee sniffing around the area looking busy. The surveillance cameras that were later put up in hopes of evidence? Guess a park employee wouldn't stand out either if they're reporting to work every day looking busy while silently reliving the brutal attack they performed feet away from where they're at. The time of death window is less than 2 hours. If no one was out there, it would make complete sense for this guy to attack her, and then less than 2 hours later, call it in and report it. I stand by the idea that if this was a random attack, this person had to have already been at the Grove when Alicia arrived. That leaves, known to us, the sex bunnies, who, again, are totally possible, or a potential employee. She makes no mention of other people, and I don't see why she'd mention an employee, because that's normal. Hence, why she never mentioned it. I wonder if police had the capability of running like a cell tower check in the area to see whose phone was pinging at the time of the crime. It was something we saw in the Emily Main case, which Obviously was in a different country, but I feel like that's technology we could have here. Maybe they did. I don't know. Maybe you're not able to. I don't know. But again, the random attack with maybe the Fish and Game employee, I think supports the time of day and quickness in which the crime occurred. It's pretty fucking ballsy to take a life in broad daylight in a public area. This did not read as a premeditated planned murder that was executed to a T. To some degree, I think the perp had to be comfortable enough to even attempt what they did and not leave enough evidence around to sloppily incriminate themselves. They had to have a good idea that there would probably be nobody there, at least at that particular day and time. And what better person than a fucking employee? Hell, even an ex-employee, if we're going to feed this theory a little more. Someone had to have known that place well enough to attack a female who was alone. They wanted to make sure she would not survive, hence the multiple attack styles. Personally, I feel like blunt force trauma was probably more of an initial attack rather than an attack to kill her. I think it was a way to throw her off balance and incapacitate her. The cutting and dumping was probably more the actual intent. The only reason I believe this is because there was no mention of trauma to her face. It sounds like the damage was probably more to the back of her head. Obviously, I haven't 100% confirmed this, but her family noticed her hands at her funeral. And the trauma to her fingers, not to her face. Even with makeup jobs morticians do, you still know when someone has taken blunt force to the face. There was mention of bruising to her body and arms, though, which would support a struggle. Whoever attacked her, though, wanted that phone, and that is the closest thing to motive we can speculate right now, which leads us to the other side of the coin here. A crime of passion committed by someone she knew or who knew her. Now, I know police said they cleared Tony and that his alibi of being with family and Pierre, I hope I'm saying that right, was solid. Now, this is pure speculation that I am indulging in for argument's sake, but from what I read, it was implied that his family was worried that Alicia was going to try to take what was rightfully his, in their eyes at least, in the divorce. I'd imagine thoughts like that come from people who aren't too crazy about the person. I'd like to think my in-laws wouldn't think I'd clean Shadow out if, God forbid, we were ever in that situation. So, given that, it wouldn't be that far out of the realm of possibility that they'd lie to cover for him. I mean, if police only cleared him on the testimony of his family, that doesn't really mean shit to me. Family will lie for family. We all know this. Now, if they cleared him based off, let's say, cell phone records placing him in Pierre, great. He could have also just left his damn phone with his family and headed over to Myron's Grove. No biggie. Now, if they have something besides that, then I'll shut the fuck up and sit down. But it didn't sound like it was anything more than that. Now, we know that Tony cheated on Alicia with an unnamed woman, hence the beginning of the end of their relationship. Is it possible that the sex bunnies were them, camping out, waiting for her to arrive, and then attacking her? Maybe. They'd know where to find her if any of them followed her on social media. And Tony arguably knew Alicia and her habits better than anyone. The phone being gone is also fucking weird. It wasn't in the purse, found a year later with all of her other belongings, so where is it? Why take it? Why separate it from the rest of her belongings? Was there something on it that this person didn't want seen? A picture she took, a communication between Tony or his girl or both of them that would place them there at that time? Or was it someone else she knew that she was communicating with that was secretly planning to meet up with her later that day? Police could never 100% rule out the possibility that she was there with someone else that day. Many people speculate that the sex bunny couple were not in fact having sex, but were maybe there on more sinister reasons. They saw Alicia taking pictures and, for fear possibly being incriminated by one of her photos, decided to kill her. That too is not completely out of the realm of possibility, in my opinion, either. They were there. And they have never come forward, which is the weirdest part of all. The one key clue that seems to push her family in one direction more than the other is the severity of her death. They feel that the blunt force trauma, the neck wounds, and the drowning speak more to a personal attack full of rage and anger for Alicia. Now, unless they can think of anyone else that had negative feelings towards her at the time of her death, that really only points to Tony. Eerily enough, too, Tony remarried like 16 months after Alicia's passing, and to a woman who is said to look very similar to Alicia, and just so happens to be a teacher as well. They have one child together that is known, and Tony moved out of state and has refused to speak to anyone regarding Alicia or her case. Sounds like this is something he does not want to touch, doesn't care to pursue, and it doesn't look like he's been part of the process of seeking justice for her. Now, obviously, everyone handles grief in different ways, but it always stands out when you see the people attempting their best at erasing those that have passed from their lives as quickly and efficiently as possible, only to never go anywhere near that part of their life again. And you know what? More often than not, those people had a hand in that person passing. Just saying. Tony's fishy, in my honest ass opinion. From a motive standpoint, it sounds like it would be him. Now, from a random opportunity standpoint, I'd say a park employee or someone with similar knowledge of that particular area in that kind of manner. Maybe even one of the people that live on one of those farm roads that lead there. Now, Alicia's case is still considered open, and police have kept most of any information they have. Okay. I'm going to start over. Now, Alicia's case is still considered open, and police have kept most, if any, information they have sealed. And from what I gathered, they have quite a bit of evidence, and they have people they haven't been able to rule out, too. So I get the feeling they're circling above what happened here. They're just waiting for the thread that pulls everything together. Now, if you're interested in following this case or supporting in any way, I highly recommend following the Facebook page her loved ones have set up for her. Out of all of the pages I have seen in researching cases both in my free time and for the podcast, this is the one that feels like they are most open to talking about her and sharing her and their stories, as well as asking for help and accepting everyone near and far that want to know what happened as well. There is a $5,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the shit stain who did this. Someone out there knows what happened. Someone out there saw something, heard something, felt something, and maybe hasn't connected the dots yet, but is close. This woman was attacked, murdered, and discovered in broad-ass daylight in a public area, all within a matter of minutes. I feel like it's virtually impossible that someone doesn't have something they can bring to this and get it moving again. If anyone listening to this feels they may have some valid information relevant to the events that happened at Myron Grove on June 1st, 2015, I urge you to reach out to Clay County Sheriff's Office at 605-677-7100. You can remain anonymous. Now, with that being said, stay safe, everyone. Don't fuck with lonely fishing holes on a Monday afternoon. Apparently, people like to just roll up and murder you while you're minding your business. To Alicia's family, I hope she receives the justice she so earnestly deserves. She had that kind of kindred soul feeling to her when I read about her, and I'm just so sorry for your guys' loss. And until next time, guys, bye-bye.